I live in a place called Australia. I've been here for quite some time. I don't know if I've made the grade to be an Australian yet. I can't quite tell. But it's a very odd place indeed in a way because it expects a miracle. Australians are now demanding their government perform miracles. Australians are on the street protesting that they want the climate change to stop permanently. They want no more climate change. You have to ask yourself, what do you mean when you don't want the climate change? Do you want to stop it in winter, autumn, spring, or summer? At what time would you like the climate to stop changing? Because different climate in winter than summer. They don't really understand that the climate is a moving feast through the year anyway. It's the weather changes according to the seasons, which each season brings its own climate. So they don't get. We want the climate change to stop, and they think it's all rather odd when you think about it. And if you think about the actual statistics, the actual statistical facts in regards to climate change, in that all of the CO2 into the atmosphere by the world itself, or the globe, the actual Earth itself, is 400 parts per million, and humans are about no more than 5% of that. Now, 5% of 400 is about 20 parts per million. So you have to think about yourself, because 1% is 4, But, so it's about 20 parts per million is a human contribution to CO2. Australia's contribution is 1/5 of a part per million. Now, the odd part about this, Australians are the intelligent part, the most intelligent part of the country, the ones in Parliament and the educators and the university people and all that, are demanding, protesting that the government do something and stop the climate changing, even though Australia, I don't maybe thinks it's living on a different planet to the rest of the place, because China's emitting a massive amount of emissions, CO2 and others, and India and all other places with a massive amount of populations. Australia's only got, a small population spread over a very large continent, and the air's as clean as it's going to get down here, wherever I live, is as clean as you're going to get for fresh air. Now, that they want that women protesting and say we're not having any more babies because we want, until the climate stops changing, we won't have any more babies. Well, that's a really good thing, because David Icke's saying there's going to be a culling. Well, if it's going to be self-inflicted culling of their genetic group, that's not a bad thing as well, because if people are so thick that they're sort of dangerous dummies, if you like. They shouldn't really be in the driving a car, for instance, or in a kitchen where there's flames and stuff like that. There could be a very great danger to themselves, set themselves on fire. Because if you think that with 1/5 of a part per million you're involved in a climate change in the first place, then you've got a real sort of mental deficiency problem. Maybe it's the water or the fluoride in the water, the mineral deficiency, who knows? But and if that's what you think, and if you think that now 1/5 of a part per million of CO2 is affecting the barrier reef and only going to affect the children's future and all like that, maybe it's better that you don't have children. Let's face it, do you want those people to have children going to pass on, which obviously is a mental deficiency, onto the next generation? So, it's like you're breeding a lower and lower level of intelligence into humanity, when part of it imagines that with 1/5 of a part per million of CO2, if CO2 is a cause of climate change, which is obviously not, but only when you look at it for 400 parts per million, and humans are 20 parts per million of the whole thing, it starts to put it in perspective. Like someone said, it's a fart in the wind. Now, there's a person in, and what Australians are, that obviously it's a rort or a rip-off. Now, what the government's just said, oh, we're going to give you all a tax break. We want to give you a tax break. What the government's been doing is taxing people massively over the last 10 years or so through the GST, the actually the tax, value-added tax on goods and services that is on electricity. Over the last 10 years, as electricity prices have doubled, obviously the government's collected a massive amount of tax in that way at all. And plus, electricity is a ubiquitous charge. You've got no choice. You can't avoid using it unless you live outside in a tent. You can't avoid using electricity. So it's a tax on your income anyway. It's a tax on your standard of living. The higher the cost of electricity, the higher taxes you pay on the GST, and therefore the greater tax it is on your income, on your living standards anyway. So when the government says we're going to give you a tax break, it's another sleight of hand. It's not giving a tax break. It's because it's regulated the electricity companies so that they cannot no longer have competitive coal-fired power stations being built, which is a very, very simple thing to do, regardless of what anyone says. It's not difficult to arrange a regional cooperative coal-fired power station. The people in that region get a scales ties system to suit them if they've got coal in the area, and they can do all sorts of. And that means that they're regulated. That the cost of energy to them is the same forever. As long as they're paying for that thing, they can then regulate the cost of that electricity to them over a long 30-year period. So it costs very little, and it can actually come down if the cost of things inflate. It actually comes down over the years. Obviously, it just stays the same. If electricity prices just stay the same, they obviously come down over the years. Now, the government wants to ignore and pretend you can't, and they all want to pretend you can't have coal-fired power stations, but that's because the government is frightened of coal-fired power stations being in competition for its mates who are in agents for solar and wind generators, which are fake energy systems, because they're an energy loss system. But that's another thing. No one wants to get that either. And the thing is that that's the thing, that the government's not. It's not being very honest when it's saying we're going to give you a tax break, a tax cut, and that's going to boost the economy. What all it's going to do is help people pay their exorbitant electricity bills, and their GST electricity bills will pay down a bit of credit card debt caused by previous electricity bills accumulating onto their household budget, and basically causing some serious hardship for many people in Australia. And because the government it wants to see itself as God or Jesus or someone or Allah or whatever it is, what they're going to change the climate, it's now lost the plot in a way when it caters to people who believe that 1/5 of a part per million of CO2 somehow contributes to climate change. And they actually, in Australia, live in such isolated little pockets in their mind, they demand climate change is stopped. I don't know what was it winter, summer, autumn, spring when you stop the climate change, because each season is a different climate. Maybe someone failed to tell them that at school. Now there's a lady in Australia called Pauline Hanson who runs a party called One Nation, and everyone sort of bags her because she's not smooth talking. She's not trained as a lawyer, so she's just a lady who's a very honest, upright lady with very good intent, and that's why they don't like about her. She's got good intent. If you've got good intent and you're in politics, you're going to upset an awful lot of people who've got bad intent and they're in politics, and they're lying and saying Australia's involved in stopping the climate change. There's all CEOs in corporations all involved in this bullshit. So they want the government to protect these socialists in the corporations. They're socialist corporations. They're ripping off the capitalists of society, which is the people who do some hard work for a living. The ordinary people doing hard work, capitalising on their energy. So socialism's now socialism for the elite, from which the government caters to, by trying to make it as difficult as possible to have cheap energy by regulating it so coal-fired power station, the obvious source of energy that everyone else is using. Pakistan's going to get into it. India and China use it. Everyone else uses it. But Australians are frightened usually because, for some reason, they think they're going to change the climate. Or they think they're involved with changing the climate. And they knock a lady called Pauline Hanson because she's honest and good intent. And they wonder why some people keep supporting her. Anyway, just to take 1/5 of a part per million of CO2 is Australia's contribution. Anyone who thinks you can get that down any further or not affect Australia's economy or damage this place permanently, and it's certainly obviously some of it's damaged intellectually, that it thinks it won't have a baby because of climate change. Well, I think that's the best news so far out of the whole thing, because do you want the lowest echelons in the IQ breeding more of their type? I mean, that's the thing. You know, if some lady thinks she can stop a climate, obviously you don't want to pass that trait on to children, would you? It's what's next after that? Tortoise brains. Oh. What's next after children that think you can stop climate? What's next? That's what the mother thinks. What's she going to pass on to the children? Who knows? That their children think they're a balloon, or whatever. Things children will think they're a duck or something. Anyway.